So I actually wanted to do a follow-up to last week about the why do I think natural powerlifters often grow better than natural bodybuilders by addressing another question and realize that about half the time I'm just making these up to give me something to talk about. Anyway, here we go. Do you think maximum strength cycles have benefits for bodybuilders? So let me define a couple of terms. One, when I'm talking about bodybuilders here, I'm talking about, the typical person seeking hypertrophy that is working in sort of, the typical hypertrophy range, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 15, sort of like, traditional hypertrophy training, hopefully applying progressive tension overload, but even if not. But what do I mean by maximum strength cycle? Now, this is sort of it ties in with the powerlifting thing. That's why I'm doing this as a follow-up, right? So typically, like, maximum strength training is defined as, 85% of 1RM and higher. That typically means a maximum set of 5 or lower repetitions, right? Like, yes, I realize that there's a lot of overlap and you can't separate, maximum strength from hypertrophy from muscular endurance, but there is a continuum where lower repetitions and higher percentages of maximum are more maximum strength and less hypertrophy. Very high repetitions tend to be more muscular endurance and somewhat less hypertrophy. And in the middle, you get more hypertrophy, less maximum strength, less muscular endurance. Again, it's a continuum, not a discrete division, but that is typically where the division is made. So within the context of this Q&A, bodybuilding training is like 6 to 15, maybe up to 20 in some point. I guess I should do a video about why I think the low load training in BFR, blood flow restriction, is such a waste of time in most conditions. But regardless, bodybuilding training, let's say 6 to 15 reps, maximum strength, sets of 5 and less. Do I think maximum strength training has benefits for natural bodybuilders? The short answer, absolutely yes. Now let me give you the long answer. So to understand why I do think that admittedly short maximal strength cycles have benefits for the typical natural bodybuilder, I need to look a little bit about what determines muscular strength. Now here I'm talking really about force production, right? How much weight you can actually move on the bar depends on biomechanical factors and levers and things of that nature that can't really be changed, right? Like if you take two individuals that have the exact same force output in, say, their quads, glutes, and hamstrings, the one who has better levers will squat more on the bar because of the biomechanics. So I'm going to I'm going to say maximum strength and talk about the weight on the bar. Realize that I'm only talking within any given individual. Right? You can't compare two different people in this regards. So once you eliminate that, once you eliminate biomechanics, and yes, I realize powerlifters do stuff to alter the biomechanics with big bench arches and altering range of motion in the squat and the deadlift and things like that to allow them to lift more weight for a given amount of force. I'm assuming that's not the case, although I'll sort of come back to that. So again, when I say maximum strength, I may flip back and forth between weight on the bar or whatever. I mean for any given individual, so that we're eliminating the things that can't be changed. I cannot change the length of your legs. Well, that's not actually true. There is that new surgery, but it makes legs longer, and that would actually make squatting harder for people. I can't change your tendon attachments. I can't change, although it was rumored that the Russians experimented with that. And supposedly there was one powerlifter who tore their tricep and had it reattached at a different place and was stronger. But again, under normal conditions, we can't alter those things. So when I'm talking about maximum strength or maximum force output, we can schematically look at that as being the combination of two factors, which are cross-sectional area of the muscle and what I'm going to just generally call neural factors. So muscle cross-sectional area, right? Muscle has a shape, right? Like it's a certain shape of length and area, and then you've got volume. And if you were to kind of cut it down straight through. Cross-sectional area would be the area of the cross-section of the muscle. And yes, it's more complicated than that. I do not want to get into shit like pennate muscles and multi-pennate muscles and angles and all that stuff, right? We're just stick with me in terms of general concepts here. So that's muscle cross-sectional area. And basically a larger muscle cross-sectionally can generate more force. Or as I'll come back to a little bit later, has more force production potential. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on the distinction I'm making. Just bear with me for a minute. But to that, we have neural factors. Now, I'm going to use this in extremely general terms because A, I haven't kept up with all the modern research, and B, it's super complicated, right? By neural factors, I mean things like intermuscular coordination, which is the coordination between different muscles in an exercise. Intramuscular coordination, the firing of the muscle fibers within a given muscle. We get into recruitment. We get into rate coding. We get into doublets coming down the nerve fiber. We get into stuff going on at the neuromuscular junction, calcium handling. There's a whole ton of shit. And it all contributes. Like I said, I'm just going to use it generally. Again, maximum strength equals muscle cross-sectional area, muscle size, times neural factors, all that other stuff. And I already talked about sort of this continuum of training. Maximum strength, 5 and below, hypertrophy, 6 to 15, 20-ish, muscular endurance, 20 and up. In older schemes, and yes, this is simplistically incorrect, the lower repetition training, 5s and heavier, 5s, 4, 3, 2 singles, tends to develop neural factors and less hypertrophy. Whereas hypertrophy range training and muscular endurance training tends to develop more hypertrophy, it's right there in the name, or muscular endurance with less neural factors. Again, this is a continuum. It's not like from 6 reps to 5, it's all neural and no hypertrophy. Or from 15 to 20, it's all muscular endurance. All types of training involve all of these factors. It's a matter of emphasis. And generally speaking, low repetition training, 5s and lower to singles, tend to emphasize those neural factors. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on this. It has to do with the fact that at those high intensities, usually 85% of 1RM or more, it is requiring maximal fiber recruitment. It is requiring maximal levels of rate coding. It is working on those adaptations that are involved with neural factors. And this is why you will hear about athletes who can grow stronger in low repetition ranges without getting bigger. And they do it by emphasizing that low repetition training and actually avoiding the hypertrophy work so much, right? Olympic lifters frequently will keep getting stronger in a low, but they emphasize singles, doubles, triples, maybe 5s for squats and stuff like that. Again, you cannot separate them out. Low repetition training, typically more neural factors. Higher repetition training, generally more hypertrophy. It's a mix. It's a matter of emphasis. So why is this important? Well, what often happens is if someone is doing pure hypertrophy training, like I said, which I'm defining here, 6 to 15 reps, maybe 20, they tend to develop muscle cross-sectional area, and there's also the sarcoplasmic growth thing, muscle size overall, but they're not maximizing those neural factors. Whereas if you take a power lifter who's really only emphasizing the low repetition stuff, they're not doing the hypertrophy work, they tend to be maximizing those neural factors without really developing muscle size. And powerlifters and Olympic lifters do reach a point where they simply can't get any stronger without gaining muscle mass, right? Once you have maximized those neural factors, maximize your technique to the nth degree, you can only continue to get stronger by getting bigger. But for bodybuilding, to a degree, the same can happen because by only working in those higher repetition ranges, bodybuilders don't necessarily optimally develop those neural factors, which leads me into a quick digression. Absolute years, I have stated that if you give me a great power lifter who's really just sort of focused on those lower repetition ranges, I can turn him into a bodybuilder in a heartbeat. And the reason is that those neural pathways are so well developed, their maximum strength is so well developed, that when I put them into higher volume, higher repetition range training, they can use such heavy weights that they just blow up, right? They've maximized the neural factors. You put them into the hypertrophy training, they explode. By the same token, if you give me a good bodybuilder, if you give me someone that has good muscle mass and has decent levers, I can turn them into a power lifter in a matter of months. There's a good example. One of the early meets my lifter Simi Singh did. There was a junior female there named Tess Red Sky, who was a phenomenal bodybuilder, right? She had great levers, she had fantastic muscle mass, and somebody at her gym approached her and said, you know, you'd be great at powerlifting. And like 3 months later, she just shattered every junior record because she had the muscle mass, she had the levers. All she had to do was the low repetition training to optimize not only her technique and learn powerlifting training, although I mean, she squatted high bar. As I remember, she pulled clean style deadlift because that's what she did as a bodybuilder. But she had not fully developed those neural pathways with just the hypertrophy training. But with that base of the muscle mass, once she learned the lifts for low repetitions, she had both maximized, and she was just, it was a phenomenal thing to watch. I also mentioned last time that a lot of natural bodybuilders cross-compete in powerlifting, which sort of feeds into this. Even if they do mostly bodybuilding training in the off-season to build muscle mass because they compete in bodybuilding, it takes relatively little time for them to drop into that maximum strength range in the competition lifts and basically teach their body to utilize the muscle that they've developed more effectively in the competition lifts, which is what the neural training is really doing. Right? Like building bigger muscles doesn't automatically make you stronger because it doesn't necessarily develop those neural factors. You have to do the neural training to optimize the ultimate force production of the new muscle mass. Whereas the Chinese, who do a tremendous amount of bodybuilding work to support their Olympic lifting, put it, a larger muscle is a potentially stronger muscle. But you have to do the neural work too. And that brings me back to the original question. Is there any science on this? Well, there hasn't been for most of the 20 years or so I've been recommending it, but there was actually a paper on this done in 2021. It's by Carvalho et al. A Stronger Better, Influence of a Strength Phase followed by a Hypertrophy Phase, Muscular Adaptations in Resistance Trained Men, Research Sports Medicine 2021, blah, blah, blah. What it did was took trained men and either had them do 3 weeks of maximum strength training, which was sets of 1 to 3, followed by 5 weeks of hypertrophy training, sets of 8 to 12, or simply 8 weeks of hypertrophy training, which I don't think is the best comparison. I think it should have been 3-5 and 5-3, but neither here nor there. They did find that the maximum strength group had slightly more growth. I mean, it was 0.2 millimeters, which is like less than a fingernail, a couple percent. They did conclude that doing the maximum strength beforehand did help, and they even point out, thus our data suggests that strength-oriented training phase allowed participants to lift heavier loads during the hypertrophy-oriented training period, increasing mechanical tension that ultimately led to a greater hypertrophic adaptation. So basically bumping up maximum strength, let them lift heavier loads in the higher repetition ranges, more mechanical tension, more growth. Pretty simple stuff. And again, the answer to that question is yes. I do think that maximum strength blocks have a benefit for natural bodybuilders, especially those who are just training in sort of that traditional hypertrophy range. But I do think it has a benefit, and it's for the reasons I just said. If all you've been doing is traditional hypertrophy work, and that means that you have built muscle, increased muscle cross-sectional area, increased the actual muscle fiber size, you have not maximized those neural adaptations. Doing even a short block of maximum strength training to sort of top those up will be beneficial because it will allow you to go back to the hypertrophy range, and be able to use heavier weights, which means you'll be able to apply more progressive tension overload, which means you'll be able to get bigger. Like I said, it's the powerlifter example I gave. Take someone with absolutely topped out neural factors and put them into some volume training and they just blow the fuck up. This is a way of incorporating that. Now, I'm not saying you need to do a lot of it or do it very frequently, right? There's an old article series on my website called Periodization for Bodybuilders that I never finished. I'm never going to finish. I would probably change some of it now. It's over a decade old, but I talked about that and the potential benefits. And all you really need is maybe 3 weeks, every 2 to 3 hypertrophy cycles. So let's say you're using, an 8-week hypertrophy cycle, like, my generic bulking routine or something, or one of the many other approaches out there. And you might do 2 of those, or maybe even 3 of those, and then drop in and do a short maximum strength cycle. And when I say that, right, you're not going to do low repetitions on everything, right? I would, assuming you're on some sort of basic split routine, say push-pull legs, you would pick like your primary compound lower body movement, whatever it is. If it's back squats because you're built for it, fine. If it's leg press, hack squats, whatever, and work that for 5s, right? So whatever you were doing 8s with, do a couple warm-ups, make that your first set of 5. Take 2 or 3 minutes, add weight, do another set of 5. 2 or 3 minutes, do another set of 5. Do that until 5s get grinding, and then you're done. And then do the hypertrophy training. For chest day, do whatever your big compound chest movement is. Bench press, whatever, hammer chest press, hammer incline press, whatever you're doing. Same thing, 5s, and then do your other stuff in the hypertrophy. For back, same thing, do a T-bar row or a cable row or a hammer high to low row, like whatever compoundy back movement you're doing, and then follow it up with your other hypertrophy work. Maybe first week, do 5s. The next week, do either triples, 3s, or 4s. I'm not a big fan of 4 sets of 4, but whatever. And same thing, whatever your final set of 5 was in the previous week, start with 4s or triples there. And then rest long enough and add weight until the set of 3 or the set of 4 gets grindy. And then do your hypertrophy work afterwards. And then the next week, drop to either triples. Doubles are pushing it. And I would absolutely not recommend maximum singles for bodybuilders. I think the potential danger is way too high. Like triples are usually fine. And you could even do like 3 weeks of triples and just build up and build up and build up. Like whatever, but I wouldn't go below 3s. You might do doubles. And same thing, start whatever weight you used in the previous week, whatever you ended with, start there, add weight. When it gets grindy, you're done. Do your hypertrophy work. Then you're going to want to take sort of an easy week, because this type of training can be hard on the joints, hard on the connective tissue, et cetera, and take an easy week and then go back to your bodybuilding training. And I think you'll be really amazed at how much stronger you are in those movements, because there will be carryover, right? If you're doing like maximum strength work on like a leg press or a hack squat, it'll carry over to quad, hamstring, and glute work, right? Like neural factors they are general because they are central, and they're also specific, but whatever, there will be carryover. And you'll be amazed at how much stronger you are in those high repetition ranges, which means you can add more weight, which means more progressive tension overload, which means more muscle size. Until 2 or 3 cycles later, you do another max strength cycle, and then take an easy week and do it again. And the Carvalho study notwithstanding, like I do typically put the maximum strength cycles after the 2 or 3 hypertrophy blocks. Although again, you can look at that as coming before the next hypertrophy block. It's kind of a matter of semantics. I mean, when you take trained men and you get them to do a 3-week strength block, well, that's technically after their previous hypertrophy training and before the next. So however you want to look at it is fine. The key is that you're going to do about 3 weeks of this stuff every 16 to 24 weeks to top up your maximal strength. Go back to lifting heavier weights in the hypertrophy range, apply progressive overload while you do that, rinse and repeat. So that's the long answer to explain the short answer that yes, 1 or 2 maximum strength cycles a year for natural bodybuilders to top up those neural factors can be extremely beneficial. So for the record, I do not read nor respond to comments on Instagram or YouTube. But I also don't delete them like all the other chicken shits in this industry. I just don't care. Cannot be bothered. If you want to tell me I'm great, cool. If you want to tell me I'm suck, also cool. If you want to ask me a question, I'll never see it. Like I said, I cannot be bothered. Clearly, I'm doing a regular Q&A. If you want to send me a question, send it to questions@bodyrecomposition.com. There's an exactly 0% guarantee that I will look at it, much less answer it. But hey, that's part of my charm, and you might get lucky.